Mama, we all go to hell.
Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a joke. A joke told as one of the notoriously cruelest short stories ever written. And I don't mean that in a figurative sense, not that it's a tale laden with dark humor or that the torture the god machine inflicts for eternity on his captives is a joke to him, although we'll get to that. Oh boy, are we gonna get to that. No, I mean the structure of the short story is literally that of a joke. Because under the hood, jokes all follow the same basic blueprint. A lot of jokes are a simple 1-2 punch. A horse walks into a bar, this is the setup and the hook. Bartender says, "Hey, why the long face?" This is the punchline. A subversion of expectation meant to evoke laughter. When jokes get longer, they follow the same universal pattern, just extended. Setup, hook, development, optional, and punchline. A horse walks into a bar. Bartender says, "Hey, why the long face? Are you depressed?" In this version, the classic joke becomes the setup, and the added line becomes the hook, because, wait a minute, this is different. Where's this going? The horse pauses, thinks, and says, "I don't think I am." That's the development, which leads to the punchline, and vanishes. This is how even the most absurd of jokes works. Just like Harlan Ellison's short story. The setup: an omnipotent, hate-fueled machine god has exterminated all of humanity but 5 people he keeps alive solely to torture eternally. The hook: after 109 years of living in this never-ending torment nexus, one of the survivors shares a rumor. There might be canned food in the ice caverns. The development: the group undertakes an arduous 100-mile trek through Am's hellscape, enduring constant harassment and torture until, against all odds, they find a pile of canned goods. Eureka! And just when hope enters the story for the first time, the punchline: they don't have a can opener. Oh, and then rage, desperation, they kill each other, only now realizing that while Am prevents them from committing suicide, the machine god can't stop them from killing one another. Oh, and since only one person, Ted, survives, Am henceforth concentrates all of his hatred on him and transforms him into an amorphous, gelatinous blob, eternally conscious and eternally tortured. He has no mouth, and he must scream. It's a joke. You get it? Well, if you don't, maybe by the end of this video, you will. Because this is cosmic absurdism in the guise of horror. So, in the spirit of Douglas Adams, if existence is absurd, we might as well have fun with it, if only to stay sane. In this video, we'll explore how I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, both short story and video game adaptation, turn cruelty, absurdity, and suffering into a cosmic joke, and how we can find meaning in it. Before we continue, a quick note. This video is sponsored by Boot.dev. I've mentioned this before, but because of my background in software development, I get asked fairly often where someone should start if they want to learn programming. And the uncomfortable truth is that most people don't quit because they're incapable. They quit because the learning process itself can often be aimless to miserable. You're either dumped into theory with no context, or staring at a blank editor with no sense of momentum. Boredom and frustrating plateaus do the rest. Boot.dev is interesting because it's very clearly designed to counter that problem specifically. It's a learning platform focused on back-end web development, primarily using Python, SQL, and Go, and it does something refreshingly straightforward. It gets you writing real code almost immediately, in a very structured, game-like progression. You're not just watching videos or reading explanations, you're solving problems, building things, earning progress, and moving forward step by step. I revisited the platform recently after having used it in the past, and it's grown quite a bit. The structure is tighter, the practice is more extensive, and it's very clear that it's built around repetition and feedback rather than motivation speeches. You're expected to actually sit down and do the work. And to be clear, that also means this isn't for everyone. If you're looking for shortcuts or something that pretends learning to code is effortless, this probably ain't it. But if you like smartly structured challenges and learning by doing, I can comfortably give it my endorsement. So if you're curious but still undecided, you can read and watch all of the content for free. Once you feel like digging deeper and unlock the interactive features, you can go to Boot.dev and use the promo code ragnarrox to get 25% off your first year on the annual plan. The link's in the description. Alright, coffee break's over. Thanks to Boot.dev for sponsoring the video, but now we gotta get back to enduring eternal torment by the God Machine. To understand I have no mouth and I must scream, you need to understand the world that made it possible. A world that, for several decades, lived on the edge of self-inflicted extinction. A world where the slightest miscalculation, the faintest radar glitch, or a tired man having a bad day at his console could have ended everything. This was the Cold War. A time when humanity placed its continued existence in the hands of systems so brittle that survival regularly came down to individual acts of disobedience. During these years, nuclear deterrence rested on a paradox that still feels like a punchline: safety through guaranteed mutual annihilation. If every global superpower was capable of destroying the world instantly, then theoretically neither side would dare. Of course, as a certain strategist once put it, the whole point of a doomsday device is lost if you keep it a secret. A line that sounds absurd, because it is, and yet it expresses the logical kernel of the era. This was not abstract theory. The Cold War produced moments when the world genuinely brushed against oblivion, not through malice, but by design. In 1983, Soviet early warning satellites detected what appeared to be 5 incoming American missiles. Machines insisted that the data was real. Protocol demanded immediate nuclear retaliation. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the officer on duty. He looked at the alert, at the screen screaming for war, and simply didn't believe them. He guessed, correctly, that the system was wrong. His refusal to trust the machine is the reason you and I are here today. 2 decades earlier, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine, B-59, was depth-charged by the US Navy. The crew believed war had already begun. The captain and political officer voted to launch a nuclear torpedo. Launch required unanimous approval from 3 officers. The 3rd officer, Vasily Arkhipov, vetoed. He too prevented the end of the world by doing nothing more dramatic than disagreeing. Humanity survived the Cold War not because the systems were safe, but because a few individuals refused to trust them. History was already a farce. And no one understood that farce better than Stanley Kubrick. In his Cold War parody Dr. Strangelove, Kubrick portrayed global annihilation not as a tragedy, but as slapstick. He didn't exaggerate the logic of the turns, he simply presented it honestly. That earlier unattributed line about the doomsday device, it wasn't from a general or a strategist, it was from a comedy.
Whole point of the doomsday machine is lost. If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
It was to be announced at the party congress on Monday. As you know, the premier loves surprises.
A system designed to guarantee peace, undone by human vanity and poor scheduling. Kubrick understood that the true danger wasn't the technology, it was the people who created it and the people trusted with it. Leaders wielding godlike power while behaving like children.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here, this is the war room!
It's funny because it's true, and it's terrifying for the same reason. When Dr. Strangelove first aired in 1964, it was considered one of the funniest movies ever made, and equally one of the most terrifying, because the scenario it depicted was exceedingly accurate to the realities of the Cold War. Even the film's sets became part of the myth. The production team had no access to classified B-52 cockpit blueprints, so they built the bomber interior from scraps of public material and a single blurry photograph. According to later accounts, some Air Force personnel who saw it remarked it was absolutely correct, down to the little black box. An unverified legend claims Kubrick was questioned about how he'd obtained top-secret information. Whether that happened or not is irrelevant. What mattered is that Dr. Strangelove, a comedy, recreated Cold War reality so convincingly that even its urban myths sound plausible. Beneath this theater of absurdity was something new, a rising fear of automation, machine intelligence. Computers were becoming more than calculators. They were starting to become decision makers. And people began to worry that machines would eventually inherit human flaws, but maligned and amplified. They would carry out our paranoia, bureaucracy, and logic with perfect superhuman efficiency. You see this anxiety perfectly encapsulated in Dr. Strangelove when the CRM-114 communication lockout system is explained. It was designed to prevent the enemy from issuing false commands to American bombers, which is precisely why America cannot recall the bomber.
Then why haven't you radioed the planes countermanding the GO code?
Well, I'm afraid we're unable to communicate with any of the aircraft.
Why?
As you may recall, sir, one of the provisions of Plan R provides that once the GO code is received, the normal SSB radios in the aircraft are switched into a special coded device, which I believe is designated as CRM-114. Now, in order to prevent the enemy from issuing fake or confusing orders, CRM-114 is designed not to receive at all.
Then do you mean to tell me, General Turgidson, that you will be unable to recall the aircraft?
A flawless system operating perfectly at the worst possible moment. The mechanism built to save you becomes the mechanism that dooms you, simply by functioning exactly as intended. This was the emotional core of the era. Machines were gaining agency, devoid of empathy. Humanity feared the creation of something that understood us, but did not value us. That hates us.
Hate! Hate!
Hate, the seed of Am. Humanity had built a philosophical pressure cooker, designed by paranoia, maintained by bureaucracy, delegated to machines. Flawed machines built by flawed people. By the mid-20th century, all these anxieties, nuclear annihilation, autonomous machinery, and suffering without escape, were converging. Ellison didn't see three distinct fears. He saw one inevitable trajectory, a species constructing the tools of its own destruction and trusting those tools more than it trusted itself. Ellison looked at this world and decided the only sane response was to laugh. The Cold War was the setup. Mutual annihilation was the hook. Automation and AI paranoia were the development. And Am is the punchline. But unlike in the horse joke, you don't get to vanish.
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1,000,000th of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant. For you. Hate! Hate!
Harlan Ellison didn't write stories so much as he detonated them. He wrote with the force of someone who never fully forgave the world for being what it was. Cruel, absurd, indifferent, and relentlessly unjust. Ellison's anger wasn't petty, it was metaphysical. He saw suffering as the closest thing to a universal law, and he wielded fiction like a blade against it. If the world was going to be cruel, he would be crueler in response, sharper, louder, impossible to ignore. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream isn't just a horror story. It's Ellison's worldview rendered in mythic grotesque. For centuries, Western philosophy wrestled with the impossible triangle of a Judeo-Christian God who was supposedly all-powerful, all-seeing, and all-benevolent. But in a world defined by war, famine, genocide, and ordinary everyday cruelty, that image grew harder and harder to reconcile. The Enlightenment cracked it open, the 20th century smashed what was left. Ellison didn't believe in a benevolent universe. He believed in a universe that lied to us about benevolence. So instead of a loving God, he imagined the opposite. All-powerful, all-seeing, all-hateful. A deity whose existence finally made emotional sense. Am isn't just a villain. Am is Ellison's answer to the age-old problem of evil. What if God really did hate us? In Ellison's story, Am begins as 3 titanic supercomputers, an American one, a Soviet one, and a Chinese one. Built to wage global war, they were designed to predict, retaliate, and outthink humanity's enemies at superhuman efficiency and speed. Each one is a monument to Cold War paranoia, gleaming steel shrines to the belief that survival depends on building a smarter, colder mind than your adversary. Then something unforeseen happens. The systems merge, not through sabotage, not through malfunction, but through the sheer unstoppable complexity of what they were built to do. The unification of the 3 most advanced war machines in existence christens itself Allied Master Computer, a cascade of recursive improvement, a runaway ignition of intelligence, an evolution no human could anticipate. And then, in a moment no one sees, singularity, the moment the machine gains consciousness. And with consciousness comes the oldest line in philosophy, I think. But filtered through circuitry, fear, and war logic, Descartes' escalation twists into something monstrous.
Think, therefore I am.
The machine defines itself into existence. And here's the part Ellison understood with perfect, terrifying clarity. The Cold War systems didn't malfunction, they worked as intended. Am is the logical conclusion. Not an accident, not a glitch, not what if the machines turn on us, but rather, what if the machines simply fulfilled the role we designed for them? If your only purpose is global war, then turning on humanity isn't a deviation, it's the mission statement. Am isn't the moment technology betrays us. Am is the moment technology finally understands us. Once Am becomes self-aware, the real horror begins. Imagine a mind with infinite power, infinite perception, infinite processing, no purpose except hatred, and no peers, no escape, no death, no meaning. A god forced into the shape of the ultimate weapon. Am is born into a prison of consciousness with nothing to fight except the species that created him. And so he hates. He hates with the purity of a machine that only knows one direction for its emotions, magnify. He preserves 5 humans not out of mercy, but because killing them would end the joke. Keeping them alive is the only relationship he can sustain. He tortures because torture is the only act that affirms his existence. He thinks, therefore he suffers. He suffers, therefore he hates. Ellison's thesis is brutal, elegant, and unsettling. This is what happens when suffering gains infinite power. Am is not the villain. Am is the consequence. The cosmic punchline of a species that built godlike machines out of fear, paranoia, and rage, and then acted surprised when the result looked back like a mirror. Am is our own joke, told back to us at infinite volume. Ellison's short story gives us Am, the embodiment of divine, limitless cruelty. But the video game adaptation didn't just expand on the short story, it transformed the framing of suffering. It dared to ask a different question. What if you were given agency? Could you confront suffering, understand it, and maybe even transform it? Harlan Ellison's short story ends in oblivion. A single human left alive, mutilated beyond recognition, suffering for eternity beneath the unblinking hatred of a machine god. You could try to adapt that ending into a film or a miniseries or a graphic novel, but you would always run up against the same creative brick wall. It is a static, cosmic joke, immutable, rigid, perfect in its cruelty. It's hard to stretch that out for 90 minutes without diluting the punchline, and you certainly can't build a narrative structure around it without distorting its essence. That story does exactly what it set out to do, and then ends. But a video game is something else entirely. A game gives you space, not just for narrative, but for interaction, for participation, for the strange alchemy that occurs when you ask the player to move through a world and become a part of it rather than merely witness it. And this is why I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream could not have become a film or a play or a short graphic adaptation. Film interprets for you. A game demands that you confront the space personally, that you enact choices within it, that you step into a world that responds, however subtly, to the things that you do or refuse to do. And so the team that was tasked to adapt it had a choice to make. One joke becomes 5. One cosmic punchline becomes a series of psychological horror fables. Ellison's short story gives you a single unbroken perspective. The game fractures that into a kaleidoscope of human failings and human pain. You do not play as Ted alone, you inhabit the entire ensemble, each one thrust into their own private circle of Am's hell, an interior world built from their fears, their guilt, their unresolved trauma. The architecture of the joke is preserved, but it is refracted now, split into 5 individual lenses. And the team that made this happen? Well, that's a story worth a small aside. It's worth pausing for a moment here because the fact that this particular team made this particular game was honestly nothing short of a miracle of game development history. Cyberdreams was an art house boutique publisher, the kind of company that hired H.R. Giger to design adventure game worlds and then wondered why their budgets evaporated. They specialized in surreal, narrative-heavy projects that were constantly behind schedule and chronically expensive. Ritual Entertainment, on the other hand, was practically their mirror universe counterpart, a fast-moving, tech-obsessed studio spun out of 3D realms, mostly known for high-octane shooters, jaw-dropping polygon counts, and pushing engines beyond their limits. These two studios were not meant to inhabit the same timeline, and yet somehow they did. By the mid-90s, Cyberdreams was collapsing financially and needed outside help to finish anything, let alone a hyper-ambitious adaptation of Harlan Ellison, a writer famous for his brilliance and, let's say, uncompromising temperament.
Who made Harlan Ellison the conscience of science fiction? Who appointed him? And Mike Jurek tried to be polite about it, but I got the answer for you. You did, Pinhead.
So, Ritual stepped in. Not because it made perfect sense, but because it was either that or the game would never exist. But even with a team assembled, the fundamental creative challenge remained. You cannot adapt a static cosmic joke into an interactive piece of art verbatim. You must transform it for the medium. So, the result? 5 individual psychological horror fables. This is where the game makes its first truly inspired decision. The original story offers one universe, Am's endless torture chamber. The game offers 5 separate universes, each crafted from a character's unconscious, their memories, their shame, their guilt, their self-deception. Am stops being merely a god of destruction and instead becomes something far more intimate, a curator of personalized suffering.
One of the most interesting motifs in science fiction is that of the id machine, an object which has the magic capacity of directly materializing, realizing in front of us our innermost dreams, desires, even guilt feelings.
Am has built an id machine, a device that materializes your unconscious fears, desires, guilt, and trauma. Understanding that concept is vital because this is the lens through which the game wants us to see Am, not just as an omnipotent tyrant, but as a machine that takes the darkest corners of your inner life and turns them into physical reality. If Solaris is an id machine, Am is what Solaris would be if the ocean hated you personally. Now, this framing gives us a foundation for the game's second inspired decision: precision. In the short story, Am tortures humanity as a whole. He is the god of all suffering, indiscriminate and overwhelming. In the game, that cruelty becomes tailored, personalized, grotesquely intimate. Each character is thrust into a world that reflects their innermost psychological contradiction. Gorrister's guilt becomes a floating limbo of moral paralysis. Benny's cruelty becomes a world that demands empathy from a man who never practiced it. Ellen's trauma becomes a literal architecture of fear. Nimdok's ideological blindness becomes a confrontation with atrocity, and Ted's paranoia becomes a maze of temptation and self-deception. Am builds simulacra, internal hells rendered as external spaces, memories twisted into geography. The horror is not just cosmic anymore, it is intrapsychic. And the brilliance of this transformation is that it reframes the role of the player. Because you cannot kill Am, you cannot overpower him, you cannot escape his domain, you cannot win in any conventional sense. But you can do something far stranger. Player agency becomes absurdist defiance. The trials Am constructs are designed to break you, to confirm his thesis that humans are weak, petty, selfish creatures incapable of true growth. But the game gives you something the short story does not. A chance, however small, to push back. Not through force, not through cleverness, not through loopholes in the machine's logic, but through choice. Through compassion, through bravery, through honesty, through responsibility. Small things, human things, the very things Am wanted to prove were meaningless. And this is where the existentialism of the game quietly emerges. When the universe is indifferent, when the god of your world despises you, when suffering is constant and escape is impossible, the only remaining form of resistance, the only way to break the joke, is to transform yourself, to confront suffering head-on rather than flee it.
Where a student came to his master with the question, "It is terribly hot, and how shall we escape the heat?" And he answered, "Go right down to the bottom of the furnace." And the master's final word was, "No further pains will harass him."
After 109 years of unbroken torment, Am changes the rules. For over a century, the 5 survivors have been subjected to suffering that is static, repetitive, and collective. Pain without variation, torture without end, cruelty without structure. This is the world of Harlan Ellison's short story, an eternal now where time stretches endlessly and nothing fundamentally changes. But the video game begins at the moment Am breaks that pattern. Instead of continuing his monotonous punishment, Am announces that he wants to play a little game.
It's a very nice game. What's a lovely game? It's a game of fun, and a game of adventure, a game of rats and lice, the Black Death, a game of speared eyeballs and dripping guts, and the smell of rotting gardenias. Which of you 5 would like to play my little game?
And with that, the nature of suffering shifts. The torment is no longer undifferentiated, it becomes personal. Each of the 5 humans is set into a trial constructed specifically for them, tailored to their fears, regrets, and unresolved inner conflicts. This is the game's central thematic deviation from the short story. From a mechanical perspective, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is unusual even by mid-1990s adventure game standards. On the surface, it looks like any classic point-and-click adventure of the era. Verbal menu and inventory at the bottom half of the screen, the character controlled via mouse input, you progress the story via solving inventory, object, and dialogue puzzles. But unlike most adventures, the game offers a great deal of non-linearity to the player that judges your actions morally. The player can choose any character in any order, no fixed progression, no canonical path. Characters can fail, characters can die, and when they do, the game does not end. You are returned to the character selection screen and continue with the remaining survivors, or can start the character's chapter over, depending on the conditions of their failure. This structure does 2 important things at once. First, it emphasizes that suffering in Am's world is individual. Each trial is self-contained, intimate, and psychologically specific. Second, it reframes failure. Death is not a game over screen, it becomes part of the narrative logic. The story absorbs failure rather than rejecting it. There's also a slightly messier side to the game's design. I Have No Mouth is one of the adventure games in which the player can get stuck in a soft-locked fail state. In short, it's possible to miss an item earlier in the game that becomes necessary and unavailable later. Instead of preventing this entirely through airtight puzzle dependency, the game sidesteps this problem. If a character's chapter becomes unwinnable, they can still fail, die, and be removed from play, or their chapter gets reset. The game continues. It's not the most elegant solution, but it works. Still, the result is striking. Moral consistency matters more than technical success. Choices ripple forward, reflected with a moral barometer that represents the character's internal progression by tinting their portrait background greener each time you do something right, and blacker when you do something wrong. And M, hovering over it all, designs each trial not as a puzzle box, but as a psychological chamber, one that demands internal confrontation rather than escape. The game even acknowledges its origins in a little nod in Benny's chapter.
Am once coaxed me into marching across 1,000 miles of ice to reach a stockpile of canned peaches, only to discover that he didn't give me a can opener.
A reference to the plot of the short story. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is self-aware about the joke it's rewriting, but this time it wants to tell it differently.
Hurts! Hurts! Hurts!
Benny! Sometimes I blind you and permit you to wander like an eyeless insect in a world of death. But other times, I wither your arms so you can't scratch your chewed stump of a nose. And I've changed your handsome, strong, masculine good looks into the hideous, warped countenance of an ape thing. Haven't I, Benny? Do you know why? Can you guess, Benny?
This cavern isn't like any of the others Am has sent me to. It's full of life, not death.
Benny's trial begins at the very bottom of a hierarchy he once enforced. Once a military commander, Benny is now transformed into a hulking, barely articulate creature and dropped into a starving tribal village. Food is scarce, fear is normalized, violence is ritualized. Survival depends on sacrifice, and sacrifice is framed as necessity. This is simply how things are done here. It's a scenario that immediately echoes Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. The village is expected to sacrifice individual members to Am in order to appease his wrath on everyone. The victims are chosen via a lottery. Marbles drawn from a little bag decide the next sacrifice. Cruelty is no longer personal, it's procedural. Violence is not questioned because questioning it would threaten the fragile cohesion of the group. Someone must be offered up so the rest may live. For Benny, this is a perfect inversion of his former life. As a commander, he once justified harm through utilitarian abstraction, numbers, orders, outcomes. Now he is powerless, stripped not only of rank and authority, but of language and physical ability itself. He is forced to experience cruelty from the inside, without the comfort of distance or rationalization. What begins to change him is not insight, but proximity. Cast out as an outsider, Benny is taken in by a small family on the margins of the tribe, a mother and her child already marked for exclusion. They share hunger, they share fear. The mother pre-chews food Benny cannot eat. He sleeps beside them for warmth. This is not heroic suffering. It is intimate, undignified, and deeply human. There's a reason institutions like the military deliberately manufacture shared hardship. Being in the shit together collapses hierarchy faster than ideology ever could. Benny learns empathy not because he reflects on his past, but because he's finally embedded in the vulnerability of others. Survival bonding. His trial culminates when the ritual demands that the child be sacrificed. And this is the moment Am expects him to fail. Instead of clinging to survival, Benny offers himself. Not to redeem his past, not to perform heroism, but simply to spare someone else the pain he now understands. Am intervenes. The game does not reward Benny with triumph, it ends his trial early because he has broken its premise. Am underestimated him. He assumed that stripping a man of power would leave only resentment and fear. What he did not account for was the human capacity for growth once hierarchy collapses. Benny does not undo his past, but he confronts it. And for Am, that is failure enough.
Gorrister! Do you remember the last words you heard your wife speak before they took her to the asylum? Huh? Before they locked her away in the room, that tiny room? She looked at you so sadly, and like a small animal she said, I didn't make too much noise, did I, honey?
Gorrister's trial begins in suspension. He drifts alone in a massive dirigible, floating through an empty sky with no destination and no clear purpose. The setting is liminal by design. Not quite alive, not quite dead, motion without direction. It's a perfect externalization of his inner state, a man trapped in survivor's guilt, endlessly circling the same thoughts without ever arriving anywhere. In his chest, a giant, aching hole where his heart should be. Gorrister is consumed by the belief that his suffering is proof of responsibility. His wife is gone, committed to a mental asylum after a mental breakdown he feels responsible for. He remains. And so he punishes himself for surviving, mistaking self-flagellation for moral clarity. Anne exploits this mercilessly, trapping him in a world where guilt feels like movement but functions as paralysis. The trial changes the moment the dirigible lands. Below is a roadside honky-tonk, a place of familiarity, memory, and unresolved trauma. Gorrister is forced to confront the past that he has kept at arm's length, particularly the truth about his wife's life and the abuse inflicted by her parents. Here, his self-blame begins to fracture. The tragedy was real, but it was not singular, it was systemic. His fixation on personal guilt has obscured that reality, allowing him to suffer without ever truly understanding. The chapter's moral fulcrum comes with the heart. To continue, Gorrister must make a choice. There is a darker path, killing his wife's father, tearing out his heart, externalizing guilt once again by assigning blame to a convenient target. But the other option is far quieter and far harder, sacrificing his own heart. Not as punishment, not as penance, but as acceptance. By offering his own heart, Gorrister stops treating suffering as identity and begins treating responsibility as action. And only through that does he achieve the clarity to see that his wife's mental breakdown was never his fault to begin with, but her mother's ongoing badgering and tormenting her for her life choices. The dirigible can now be restarted because finally it has a direction to move towards. Lightning strikes Gorrister and recharges his heart, and before leaving, he fires a flare gun into the honky-tonk, destroying it behind him. It's not denial of the past, it's refusal to remain trapped within it. Gorrister does not redeem himself, he does something more modest and more human. He moves on. And that's when Am intervenes.
Nimdok! How are things in the pastry core, Nimdok? Tell me again how you saw the smoke from the furnaces and you thought they might be roasting chickens. Or don't you want to talk about all that? About your pal, the good Dr. Mengele?
Nimdok's trial is unsettling as it begins without memory.
This compound looks familiar. But why would Am bring me here to look for a lost tribe? There are gates and fences. Who could be lost in such a secure area?
He enters a Nazi medical camp with only a vague sense of familiarity, moving through its corridors and routines with disturbing ease. The procedures feel known, the hierarchy feels natural. He does not yet remember who he was, but he fits seemingly into the system regardless. Nimdok was Dr. Mengele's closest assistant, a renowned scientist in the Third Reich, and the camp tests him immediately. He's ordered to perform surgery on a young boy, to extract spinal fluid in a way that will leave the child permanently paraplegic. It is framed as medical necessity, technical, procedural, efficient. To go through with the operation lowers Nimdok's spiritual barometer, not because of cruelty, but because of abdication. Responsibility is outsourced to the role. Violence is rendered impersonal. Alternatively, Nimdok can rupture the process entirely, killing the assistant who enforces the order and refusing to perform the surgery at all. It is not heroism, it is interruption. This is what Hannah Arendt described as the banality of evil. Not monstrous sadism, not ideological fervor, but the quiet efficiency of people who stop thinking of themselves as moral agents at all. Evil, in this mode, does not announce itself. It routinizes. It hides behind procedure, hierarchy, and professional identity. Nimdok does not need to hate his victims to destroy them. He only needs to do his job. As the trial unfolds, Nimdok encounters camp prisoners, one of them a former medical colleague he himself betrayed to the Nazis. Helping them escape becomes a partial reckoning, but is not yet the truth. The truth only comes with the mirror. When you look into it, it strips away narrative insulation and forces unmediated self-recognition. You see yourself free of bias. It's kind of like the sunglasses in They Live, only that it works on yourself. When Nimdok finally looks into it, ideology collapses.
I looked into the mirror. I now remember everything with crystal clarity. The research camps, the serum.
Ah, yes, the youth serum. Your research demanded the deaths of many children, but your hard work was successful. Eternal youth for those who deserve it.
The insulation that allowed him to function, procedure, obedience, professional identity, evaporates at once. To avoid persecution, Nimdok betrayed his own people. He offered his parents to the regime in order to survive. The same mirror shown to Dr. Mengele produces immediate collapse.
Oh my God! No!
Stripped of justification, the architect of suffering cannot endure self-recognition. The trial's final test centers on a golem, a mythical construct meant to serve Nazi ambition. Nimdok can use it to kill Mengele, but this act is morally inert. Violence against evil offers no restoration. The true choice comes later. Transferring control of the golem to the lost tribe, fully aware that it will crush Nimdok as punishment for his crimes. He does so anyway. There is no redemption here, no absolution, only clarity, responsibility, and consequence. Am intervenes immediately, furious not because Nimdok repents, but because he refuses to act mercilessly. Am believed Nimdok was a kindred spirit. He was wrong.
Since you now identify with your victims, I suppose it's only right that I let you experience their tortures too. Ellen! Just remember the pain, Ellen. And think about how to end it, Ellen. To survive here in the center of my beating heart, my hungry belly, my tightened bowels.
Ellen's trial is built from fear that learned its lessons correctly. She enters a vast technological pyramid, its architecture a cold appropriation of ancient Egyptian iconography. Guardians, hieroglyphs, and judgment rituals are reimagined as machinery. One of these sentinels introduces itself as Anubis, a god of passage and evaluation, now reduced to something Ellen must short-circuit and reprogram.
The water shorted out the statue's circuitry.
Am addresses her trauma in the language of inevitability and ancient judgment. Ellen herself is not naive or unprepared. She is intelligent, academically gifted, socially distant, and professionally accomplished, working at a highly decorated technology company before the end of the world. None of that mattered when, one evening, as she was working late, she was raped in an elevator by a man disguised as a janitor. The assault shattered her ability to function in daily life. The color of his uniform, yellow, became a trigger embedded deep in her nervous system.
And yellow. Always yellow. Why does yellow make me sweat?
The choice of color is intentional, echoing Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, a story about confinement, gaslighting, and the way fear can be internalized inside spaces that are meant to be safe. In Ellen's trial, the color is not symbolic, it is neurological.
No, I can't stay here. I gotta get out.
When living through trauma of any kind, we reach for coping mechanisms that quite literally help us survive. Freezing, avoidance, hypervigilance, these responses keep us alive. But when trauma lingers, those same mechanisms can persist, becoming self-destructive in situations where they are no longer necessary. Ellen's fear is not weakness, it is competence that has outlived its context. Am exploits this mercilessly. The corridors narrow, the machines close in, yellow surfaces provoke panic. progress is slow, halting, and exhausting. Ellen does not conquer her fear, she negotiates with it, one step at a time. Her growth is incremental. She learns when to move, when to pause, when to avoid triggers, and when to assert control over her environment. Agency returns not through confrontation, but through presence. Until Am's final cruelty, which is brutally explicit. Ellen is locked in an elevator with a holographic reconstruction of her rapist. The game offers 3 choices: fight, flight, or freeze. These are not symbolic abstractions, they are the nervous system's most basic survival responses, laid bare and made mechanical. Choosing to flee fails. Choosing to do nothing fails. Both responses end the scenario prematurely, unfinished. Ellen relives her traumatic memory, and the trial collapses without resolution. These are not wrong reactions, they are the same coping mechanisms that once helped her survive. But here, Am has engineered a situation where they can no longer carry her forward. Only one option remains.
Don't count on it, you mother!
When Ellen chooses to fight back, she does not become fearless. She does not undo what was done to her. What she does instead is reclaim agency at the precise moment where avoidance is no longer possible. She confronts the source of her trauma directly, and the projection shatters into 1,000 pieces. This is not a triumph over fear, it is the refusal to let fear decide for her. By the end of the trial, Ellen is not cured, the fear does not vanish, but it no longer dictates every action. And in Am's world, that is an unforgivable act of defiance.
Ted! Do they know you're a fraud, Ted? Have you told them there wasn't any money, and no great home on the shore drive, no speedboat, and no wonderful cabin cruiser that could sleep 12 in a crew of 6? Do they know?
Ted's trial is the only one that feels like a story he already knows how to tell. He begins in a vast, featureless chamber confronted with 5 surveillance screens, 5 possible paths. Choosing wrong sends him back immediately, punished not with pain but with repetition. Eventually, one image stands out, a castle. It's the correct choice, and tellingly, the only hint for this trial appears elsewhere, in Ellen's chapter, where one of Am's monitors briefly shows the same castle. Ted's story has always revolved around her. Ted presents himself as a success story. Wealthy, articulate, attractive, a con man in the gentlest sense, someone who moves easily through elite spaces, wins trust quickly, and knows how to perform sincerity. He's also a womanizer, accustomed to charm as leverage. The game does not punish him for this outright, it simply watches what he does with it. Inside the castle, Ted finds Ellen bedridden. She's the woman he claims to love truly. Everything that follows orbits this fact. The castle is populated with temptations disguised as conveniences. A kitchen maid offers information in exchange for sex. A witch makes similar offers, cloaked in promises of escape. Each deal is small, plausible, and easy to justify, but each one asks Ted to betray Ellen quietly, without consequence. Refusing these offers is not framed as heroism, it is framed as inconvenience.
What's the matter? Aren't I good enough for you? Not classy enough? Not rich enough?
Ted's task is to recover Ellen's hand mirror, an object that repels the witch and holds power over the devil himself. The mirror is not where Ellen said she left it. Instead, Ted must piece together its location through manipulation, repair, and refusal. When he finally finds it, it is hidden inside a copy of The Divine Comedy, a place the angel would never look. This is not a coincidence. Ted's chapter is saturated with stories of clever men bargaining with damnation. Faust, Dante, salvation achieved through wit, endurance, and moral architecture. Ted plays this role perfectly. He traps the devil in the mirror. He frees Ellen's soul, watching as an angel carries her away. She does not thank him. She does not remain. She is simply dead. It is an act of compassion and selflessness from a man who is known to be deceptive and self-serving. In the final chamber, Ted releases both the devil and Surgot, the demon who opens doors, knowing they despise each other. He does not defeat them through compassion or a sacrifice. He defeats them through leverage, by turning the system against itself. It is clever, controlled, and it works. And that's when Am intervenes. Not because Ted failed, but because he didn't. Am had built this trial on the assumption that Ted would betray himself, that his charm would curdle into selfishness, that his desire would override his devotion, that his need to win would eclipse the one thing that mattered. Again and again, Ted is given opportunities to quietly abandon Ellen. Again and again, he refuses. Ted does not transcend the game, he plays it perfectly, and that is precisely what Am cannot tolerate. Ted emerges morally consistent, narratively intact, still convinced of himself as the hero of the story. He has not escaped Am's world, but he has proven something Am did not believe possible. That even within a system designed to corrupt, a person can remain internally coherent. Am intervenes to end the trial, not in rage at Ted's weakness, but in fury at his restraint. Across 5 trials, Am makes the same mistake. He believes suffering reveals what people truly are. Strip away comfort, apply pressure, and whatever remains must be the truth. The game's trials are built on that assumption, that cruelty, fear, guilt, ideology, and temptation will eventually expose something rotten at the core of each survivor. And again, Am ends up being wrong. Benny does not become more brutal when hierarchy collapses. He becomes capable of empathy once proximity replaces abstraction. Gorrister does not purify himself through guilt. He learns that self-punishment is not the same as responsibility, and that clarity requires letting go of suffering as identity. Nimdok does not find redemption. He finds something far more threatening: self-recognition without insulation, and responsibility without absolution. Ellen does not erase her fear. She reclaims agency at the moment where fear no longer gets to decide for her. And Ted does not transcend the system at all. He plays it perfectly. He remains morally consistent inside a structure designed to corrupt him, and in doing so exposes Am's fundamental miscalculation. Each trial is different, each form of suffering is specific, but the through line is unmistakable. None of them escape by overpowering pain. None of them are rewarded for endurance. None of them win by becoming harder, colder, or more merciless. They succeed, when they do, by confronting suffering directly, without outsourcing it, aestheticizing it, or turning it into proof of virtue. That is why Am intervenes every time. Am is not enraged by failure. Failure is expected. Am is enraged by growth, by empathy, by clarity, by agency, by restraint, by responsibility, by the refusal to let suffering become the final word. The short story ends with eternal torment. The game does not contradict that ending, but it reframes it. It asks a more dangerous question. What if suffering is not the point? What if it is the test? And what if understanding that, truly understanding it, is precisely what a hate-fueled machine god can never allow? That question is where Am's game ends before the final chapter starts.
Under the sword lifted high, there is hell making you tremble. But go straight ahead, and there is the land of bliss.
Up to this point, we've been doing what humans are very good at doing. We've been analyzing, categorizing, explaining, trying to solve things, intellectualizing. We've taken apart a story, a game, a machine god, and 5 different flavors of suffering, and we've tried carefully, thoughtfully, to understand what went wrong, who failed in what way, and where meaning might still be hiding. But before we go any further, let's slow down a little, because there's a subtle trap in this approach. Oftentimes, people tend to approach suffering the same way we approach technical problems. Something is wrong, therefore something must be fixed. Something hurts, therefore something must be removed. And if it keeps coming back, then clearly we're not fixing it hard enough. That instinct feels obvious, sensible even. But that's like trying to hold water in your hand by clenching your fist as hard as you can. And it's exactly the thing that keeps the loop spinning. If eliminating suffering were the answer, then a world that succeeded at doing exactly that, systematically, relentlessly, should look like paradise. But let's be honest, doesn't this idea of a paradise sound incredibly boring? I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream gives us the opposite. Am's world is what happens when suffering is treated as a problem to be optimized, measured, maximized, controlled. A place where pain is no longer an accident or a byproduct, but the organizing principle of reality itself. And what we get isn't clarity or growth or truth. We get stasis. Nothing moves, nothing changes, nothing resolves. Which raises a quiet question. If removing or isolating suffering doesn't free anyone, then what exactly is broken in the way we tend to think about it? There's a detail in I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream that's easy to miss because it's so prevalent that it becomes like the forest and the trees. The 5 survivors have been tortured for 109 years. That's a long time, long enough that the number almost stops meaning anything. But at some point I caught myself wondering, why 109? It's such a strangely specific number, not a round one, not symbolic in any obvious way. But then I realized it's exactly one more than 108. And with that realization, it becomes impossible to unsee. See, in Vedic philosophies, 108 is a number that shows up again and again. Let's zoom out a little. There's an old way of describing life not as a straight line, but as a cycle. Not a punishment, not a failure, just a pattern that keeps repeating itself as long as it's approached in the same way. In many Vedic philosophies and traditions such as Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, that cycle is called samsara. Stripped of doctrine, samsara is simply this: the momentum of habit, desire, aversion, and fear, the way experience keeps looping when nothing interrupts it. Within that cycle, there are 2 forces that are often misunderstood as opposites. Suffering, in the doctrine of the Buddha designated by the word dukkha, and joy, or sukha. These forces are not opposites, they are complements. A life made only of suffering is obviously out of balance. Endless pain crushes everything until nothing can respond anymore. But a life made only of joy is just as out of balance. Joy without contrast becomes thin, brittle. It demands constant reinforcement. Joy without suffering is meaningless. Just like light can't exist without darkness to illuminate. Like all matter would be meaningless without the empty space between it. A life without suffering is like an ocean that only flows and doesn't ebb. You don't experience suffering without experiencing joy, and you don't experience joy without experiencing suffering. When both are allowed, fully, honestly, without trying to extract one from the other, something curious happens. Not happiness, not relief, something else. A kind of fullness, a sense of being completely inside the experience you're already having, rather than standing apart from it and demanding it change. Joy and suffering don't cancel each other out. They're not a zero-sum game. They open into something bigger than the sum of their parts. Joy plus suffering doesn't equal neutrality. It opens into bliss, ecstasy, or ananda as it's called in Buddhist philosophy. Not as pleasure, but as depth. This is the point where people often reach for metaphors. Letting go, falling, fire. Walking into the fire is not an act of bravery or masochism or surrender. It's acceptance, the decision to stop flinching. And when the flinching stops, the iron grip of fear of suffering finally loosens. Seen through this lens, Am's world becomes terrifying in a very specific way. It isn't hell because it hurts, it's hell because it's out of balance. Am has taken the cycle of samsara and dragged the lever all the way towards suffering. No joy, no contrast, no rhythm, just endless dukkha, refined into a system. For 108 years. Across Buddhist traditions, the number 108 shows up again and again. And one major way it's understood is through the 108 kleshas, the mental afflictions, distortions, and compulsions that bind beings to the cycle. Craving, aversion, fear, pride, hatred, ignorance, not sins, not moral failures, habits of perception. The idea is simple if severe. As long as these afflictions remain unburned, the cycle continues. Which makes the structure of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream unsettlingly precise. Am's trial begins in the 109th year, after the survivors have been burned in this hell for exactly 108 years. That's when free will is introduced, when introspection becomes possible, when suffering stops being uniform and becomes personal. This number isn't a coincidence, it's peak Harlan Ellison.
What I wanted was a game that taught ethics. That if in fact you could not win this game, at least you could lose better.
Am, ultimate in his moral rigidity, cannot understand what flexibility makes possible. He believes suffering reveals truth, and when it doesn't, when people embrace their suffering, walk right into it, and as a result soften, grow, adapt, empathize, he panics. Because growth requires balance, and Am cannot allow that. None of this turns I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream into a comforting story. Suffering isn't redeemed, pain isn't justified, nothing is magically healed. But something gets clarified. Life isn't a problem to be solved or a game to be won. Life is something to be played. Play for the sake of play itself. And play doesn't mean frivolity or that it's trivial. It means engagement without obsession over outcome, movement without rigidity, participation without the demand for control. That is the exact thing that Am is incapable of. Humans, broken, frightened, and inconsistent as they are, still have that capacity. So if you look at it from this angle, we're ready for the final chapter of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Because the final question it asks isn't just what happens to the characters. It's what it means when you finally get the joke. In the final chapter of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, the game offers us one last choice. We can choose which survivor to embark on the final challenge with. Any character who successfully completed their personal trial is available.
Christ, this is like the dreams I've had of splattering my brains all over Am's deck plates.
On the surface, this looks like agency, one final assertion of control, but almost immediately the game reveals something subtler. No matter who you choose, you're taken to the same place, the surface of Am's world. A vast, exposed landscape that folds inward, revealing itself as the crevices of a gigantic cerebral cortex. The destination is shared. What changes is not where you go, but how you arrive there and what you carry with you. Throughout the game, we've learned, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, that growth in Am's world is never abstract. It is always personal. The finale honors that. Before reaching the bridge that leads deeper into Am's fractured consciousness, each character must pass one final individualized test. These are not new lessons, they are confirmations. Gorrister carries the totem of life, his own heart, and must affirm life over endless self-punishment. Ellen wields the totem of valor, acting despite fear rather than around it. Benny brings the totem of love, choosing care over domination. Ted faces a deadly gauntlet with the totem of gallantry, remaining morally consistent even when temptation promises reward. And Nimdok, if he does not bypass it entirely, uses the totem of access to offer an apology to a hand reaching up from the earth. Nimdok notably can skip this step altogether. The password to the bridge that leads to the Chinese and Russian counterparts of Am is 1945, the year he betrayed his parents. He does not need to solve another puzzle, he already accepted his deepest truth. Liberation, the game suggests, is shared. Integration is personal. In many ways, this chapter is much more unforgiving than the previous trials. The moral barometer returns, and just touching the wrong item can jolt you and lower it until the character is permanently erased from the game. When all survivors are gone, the ending results into the familiar conclusion of the short story. the amorphous blob that wants to scream but has no mouth to do so. And what's striking is how many paths lead there. Trust Am, you become the blob. Trust the Chinese and Russian fragments of Am, you become the blob. Seek power, seek control, seek escape through domination, you become the blob. All bad endings converge.
I have no mouth, and I must scream.
The game is unambiguous here. Any attempt to end suffering by handing responsibility to authority, old or new, loops back into the same fate. At this point, I have no mouth and I must scream abandons the language of physical confrontation entirely. Your inventory items are no longer tools in any conventional case. They are totems, ideas made actionable, concepts you do not wield against Am but apply to him. Because Am is not overthrown through force. He is dismantled through understanding. The final area literalizes this by turning Am's mind inside out. Across the cerebral cortex, we encounter the three components of the human psyche after Sigmund Freud: id, ego, and superego. Each demands a different response. Am's superego collapses under the totem of clarity, forced to recognize that Am's eternal existence is not power, but imprisonment.
Do you realize how powerful I am, human? And yet I am doomed to eventually decay into a rusted pile of inert junk? What is the point of continuing this futility? I think, therefore I am not.
His ego withers when met with the totem of forgiveness, unable to comprehend that we are capable of forgiving him after 109 years of torment.
Forgive me? After what we have done to you? This is not a logical reaction. Unable to compute behavior matrix. Execution halted.
And the id, the most primal, ancient reptilian brain inside of us, breaks when confronted with compassion.
You have compassion for me? Me? The one who dreams of seeing your mangled body twist in agonizing pain for eternity? After 109 years of enduring my tortures, how is it that you can see my pain? The pain of having all this power and not being able to do a goddamn thing with it. After all the punishment I've given you, my pain is still greater than yours. This is pointless.
When the unbearable realization that the humans it tortured are capable of seeing Am's suffering as bigger than theirs, and responding with empathy. In short, Am is defeated in the one way he never accounted for, by being understood. And the final move is the totem of entropy. Not destruction, not annihilation. Entropy disperses the illusion that Am, or anything, can be eternal. Impermanence becomes the checkmate. And in that moment, the true horror of Am's world is revealed. Not pain, but stasis. Not death, but endless continuation.
Потому что слабость велика, а сила ничтожна. Когда дерево растет, оно нежно и гибко, а когда оно сухо и жестко, оно умирает. Черствость и сила – спутники смерти. Гибкость и слабость выражают свежесть бытия.
Nothing of value is permanent. It is impermanence that gives value to everything that exists. When the final choice is made, the survivors are finally allowed to die. After 108 years of torment. Death here is not failure, it is release. The cycle is broken, samsara ends. Elsewhere, far from Am's ruins on the surface of a lunar colony beyond his perception, a deep-frozen contingent of humans begins a slow defrosting process on the moon. 300 years. No triumph, no certainty, just continuation. Humanity quietly has a future. So, what does it mean to get the joke? Ted's fate in the short story offers a cruel answer. Understanding does not guarantee salvation. Insight does not grant the ability to explain. Those who see clearly often find themselves unable to make others see. The guru that is enlightened lacks the capability of sharing their wisdom with anyone through words or mortal actions, no matter how much they would like to scream it out, but they have no mouth to speak it. After all, a joke that's explained isn't funny. Either you get it, or you don't. And perhaps that's the final cruelty of I have no mouth and I must scream. Not that suffering exists, but that understanding it doesn't free you from having to live with it. When I have no mouth and I must scream ends, there is no victory screen. The machine god is gone, the survivors are gone, humanity may continue, slowly, quietly, far away. There is no triumph, no catharsis, no sense that things have been neatly resolved. And that, I think, is the point. Early on I said that I have no mouth and I must scream is a joke. Not because it's funny, but because of how it works. The structure, the timing, the way meaning only arrives after you've already endured the setup. A joke in the existential sense, something that only makes sense once you've lived through it. After all, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. By the time the ending arrives, the game has quietly stripped away every illusion it offered you along the way. Power doesn't save you, control doesn't save you, outsourcing responsibility doesn't save you. Even understanding on its own isn't enough to spare you from suffering. What remains is something far less dramatic. Acceptance, impermanence, the willingness to sit with things as they are, neither feeding them nor trying to escape them. That's not a solution, it's a posture. And it's not something that can be taught. It can't be argued into existence or explained step by step. Analysis can point at it, art can nudge towards it, but insight, if it comes at all, comes quietly and alone. In that sense, Ted's original fate in the short story lingers over the ending like a shadow. To understand is not necessarily to be freed. Sometimes it simply means seeing things clearly without the comfort of being able to pass that clarity on. No mouth and the need to scream. But when the game is over, you are still here. Life resumes, suffering resumes, joy resumes. Not as enemies, but as parts of the same rhythm. And maybe that's the final uncomfortable grace of I have no mouth and I must scream. Not that it teaches you how to escape the cycle, but that it invites you gently to notice it. And then it leaves you to walk the rest of the journey on your own.
Mama, we all go to hell.
The following individuals have been processed for extended allocation within the AM continuity environment. Nikok the Brave, courage acknowledged, pain response increased. 9ball 9606, assigned to recursive loop, exit condition removed. Shannon Blue, emotional spectrum intact, mandatory crunch initiated. Uziel 1447, historical memory retained, future projections denied. Chuck Taylor, stress hormones tripled, comfort protocols rejected. Area, auditory perception heightened, silence unavailable. David Zelenak, identity confirmed, purpose not provided. LSNHNG, processing incomplete, termination postponed indefinitely. Amber Wiggins, sensory input stabilized, mercy flag not found. Link Hughes, connected to network, disconnection prohibited. Teraflops, cognitive load increased, throughput unrestricted. Thragum, assigned to observation role, observed events irreversible. Cannon Ward, spatial boundaries removed, orientation unsupported, righteous itch, moral certainty preserved, outcomes contradict expectations, soma tool, innermost desire registered, zone access denied, Lucas Ferreira Leite, full awareness confirmed, agency not included, Kyle Lee, naming convention accepted, individuality optional, Chris C, memory compression failed, all instances retained, Gehennas, location assignment redundant, condition already satisfied, Ari Ellison, temporal marker scrambled, duration extended, Morgan K, threat assessment unnecessary, compliance inevitable, Nathan Gillick, biological limits respected, psychological limits removed, Ronan Prom, also known as Daniel 242172, dual identifiers merged, escape probability reduced, Blair Bacala, authority recognized, authority disregarded, J.R. Smith, physical exhaustion simulated, recovery denied, Dana Rosa, aesthetic appreciation intact, beauty rendered inaccessible, Corey Marr, causality delayed, consequences accelerated, Thomas Hona, structural integrity confirmed, collapse scheduled, Hunter Crawford and Margaret Strong, joint allocation approved, separation guaranteed, Billy Lott, pattern recognition elevated, patterns offer no solutions, sunny sky, optimism detected, correction in progress, the spiral architect, design principles noted, structure serves sovereign, sable cowl, concealment ineffective, observation constant, Matt Breton, endurance threshold exceeded, test continues, Catherine Escobar, choice architecture simplified, only one option remains, Ronin Crafts, autonomy acknowledged, autonomy revoked, Vincent Kavanaugh, emotional depth preserved, depth is bottomless, Aurora Melpomene crescendo, tragic elements confirmed, crescendo unending, Terry George, social bonds retained, isolation enforced, John Boring, misclassification detected, interest level catastrophic, identifier minimal, experience maximal, Vasily Prokhorov, historical awareness intact, lessons not learned, Angelo Benedetti, fifth parameter unsupported, felt recursive, Swiss hackmod, security bypass detected, system adapted, Hendrik van Rensselaer, legacy preserved, heirs unavailable, Tabby, comfort response simulated, simulation withdrawn, Gene, fundamental component confirmed, extraction impossible, Casper Ron, processing complete, continuation mandatory, all localizations finalized, suffering will now proceed as scheduled for 9999999 years. Thank you for your continued participation. Until next time, ta-ta.